The sky above Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, burned orange on the morning of October 26, 1942. Dawn had barely cracked the horizon when the air raid sirens began their metallic wail across the mud-caked airstrip. The smell of aviation fuel mixed with wet jungle rot hung thick in the tropical heat.
Ice.
Inside a rusted corrugated tin shelter that doubled as a ready room, First Lieutenant Thomas "Tommy" Caldwell of VMF 121 sat on an ammunition crate, his hand steady as he threaded a worn leather shoelace through the trigger guard of his service pistol holster. Around him, other Marine pilots scrambled into flight gear, their faces pale with the particular exhaustion that comes from sleeping in foxholes and eating cold rations for 63 consecutive days. The distant rumble of approaching engine steady, synchronized. Unmistakably, Japanese grew louder with each passing second. Before we dive deeper into this remarkable morning, if you're passionate about untold stories from World War II, stories of courage, ingenuity, and the extraordinary moments that shaped history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We bring you these forgotten tales every single week, because some stories deserve to be remembered. Henderson Field in late October 1942 was not a place where men expected to survive. It was a rectangle of crushed coral and mud hacked from the jungle by Navy Seabees and Marine engineers, barely 1,500 yards long, surrounded on 3 sides by hostile terrain, and on the 4th by an ocean patrolled by Japanese warships. The airstrip had changed hands twice already. American control was tenuous at best. Supply lines were strangled. Food came in trickles. Ammunition was rationed. Spare parts for aircraft were scavenged from wrecks. Pilots flew planes held together with baling wire and prayers, their Grumman F4F Wildcats outmatched in nearly every performance metric by the nimble Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters that dominated Pacific skies. The Japanese high command viewed Guadalcanal as a temporary setback, a minor piece in a larger strategic puzzle. Their pilots, many of them veterans of China, Pearl Harbor, and the devastating raids across Southeast Asia, approached the island with the confidence of an undefeated force. They had been trained in the spirit of Bushido, conditioned to view their aircraft as extensions of their will, their mission as sacred. The Zero was their swordlight, fast, maneuverable beyond anything the Americans could field. Japanese tactical doctrine emphasized aggression, close-line dogfighting, and the belief that superior spirit and skill would overcome material disadvantage. What they did not expect, could not have predicted, was the peculiar genius born from American desperation. Tommy Caldwell was 23 years old, former crop duster from Nebraska who had learned to fly in his father's Stearman biplane over endless wheat fields. He had joined the Marine Corps in the spring of 1941. Motivated less by politics and more by a restless need to see something beyond the flat horizon of the Great Plains. By October 1942, he had been on Guadalcanal for 2 months. He had flown 47 combat sorties. He had shot down 3 confirmed enemy aircraft and watched 6 of his squadron mates die in flames. He had malaria, dysentery, and a persistent tremor in his left hand that he hid from the flight surgeon. What he did not have was working gun synchronization gear. The F4F Wildcat was armed with 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, 3 mounted in each wing. These weapons were synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, using a complex mechanical interrupter system that prevented bullets from striking the spinning blades. When the system worked, it was devastatingly effective. When it failed, and on Guadalcanal, with humidity, mud, and lack of maintenance, it failed often. Pilots faced a grim choice: don't fire, or risk shooting off their own propeller and tumbling into the ocean. Caldwell's Wildcat, Bureau number 5244, had suffered synchronization failure 3 days prior during a strafing run on Japanese positions near the Matnika River. The armorer, sleep-deprived corporal from Pittsburgh, had done his best with the tools available, but the timing gear was worn beyond proper spec. The guns would fire, but the synchronization was off by a fraction of a second, enough to turn the propeller into shrapnel if Caldwell held the trigger down for more than a 2-second burst, so he improvised. Caldwell had noticed something during his months of combat. The Wildcat's control stick had a natural vibration at certain throttle settings, a harmonic resonance that ran through the airframe. If he could feel that vibration, could train his trigger finger to pulse in rhythm with it, he might be able to fire in short, precise bursts that avoided the propeller blades even with faulty synchronization. It was less a technique and more a gamble, a tactile improvisation born from desperation and the kind of intimate knowledge a pilot develops when his life depends on his aircraft, but feeling the vibration through heavy flight gloves was nearly impossible. The solution came to him on October 23rd, 3 days before the battle that would define his war. He was sitting outside his tent, bootless, mending a torn flight suit with a sewing kit his mother had tucked into his duffel bag before he shipped out. One of his bootlaces had snapped that morning. As he pulled the broken lace free, an idea struck him with the clarity of desperation, ether-conducted vibration. If he wrapped a shoelace around his trigger finger, beneath his flight glove, the leather would act as a tactile sensor, transmitting the stick's vibration directly to his skin. He could feel the engine's rhythm, anticipate the harmonics, and time his bursts with a precision that mechanical systems couldn't match. It was absurd. It was unorthodox. It violated every principle of modern aerial gunnery. It was also the only chance he had. He spent the next 2 days practicing. He would sit in his cockpit during the suffocating midday heat, engine running, stick in hand, firing imaginary bursts while feeling the vibration through the shoelace wound around his finger. His squadron mates thought he had finally cracked. From the strain, the flight surgeon asked if he needed to be grounded. Caldwell just smiled and kept practicing, his finger twitching in rhythm with an engine only he seemed to hear. October 26th. Arrived with the inevitability of typhoon season. Intelligence. Reports indicated a major Japanese air raid forming up at Rabaul, 300 miles to the northwest. The enemy was launching everything they had: bombers, fighters, reconnaissance aircraft in a coordinated strike designed to obliterate Henderson Field once and for all. The American defenders could muster barely 24 operational aircraft. Pilots who could stand were ordered into the air. Those who couldn't were given rifles and told to man the perimeter. Caldwell climbed into his Wildcat at 0620 hours. The shoelace was wrapped snugly around his right index finger, hidden beneath his glove. He ran through his pre-flight checks. With the mechanical precision of a man who had done this so many times, it had become liturgy. Fuel, oil pressure, magnetos, flaps, trim, everything marginal, nothing optimal. The engine coughed to life with a belch of blue smoke. Around him, other Wildcats were taxiing into position, their propellers blurring into invisibility, their pilots encased in tiny bubbles of plexiglass and aluminum alloy. Alone with their thoughts and their fear, the tower gave the scramble order at 635. Caldwell's Wildcat accelerated down the coral strip, bouncing over ruts and shell craters, the tail coming up at 40 knots, the wheels leaving the ground at 70. He retracted his landing gear and climbed toward the rising sun, the jungle falling away beneath him in a riot of green. The ocean stretched to the horizon, impossibly blue, impossibly empty. Other Wildcats formed up on his wingset aircraft. In total, all that could be spared. All that stood between Henderson Field and annihilation. They didn't have to wait long. The Japanese formation appeared at 0702 hours. 30 miles out and 15,000 feet up a swarm of silver specks. Against the morning sky, 27 Betty bombers in tight V formations, courted by 16 Zero fighters weaving above and behind them like protective falcons. The bomber stream was disciplined, textbook perfect, the kind of formation the Japanese air doctrine had. Refined over years of combat, Zeros climbed higher as the American fighters approached, positioning themselves for the classic diving attack that had shredded so many Allied formations. Caldwell's squadron commander, Captain James Sweat, called out targets and assignments over the radio, his voice crackling with static and adrenaline. Caldwell was assigned to engage the high-cover Zeros while other elements went after the bombers. It was a suicide mission dressed up as tactics. The Wildcats were slower, less maneuverable, and outnumbered 2-1. Their only advantages were armor, firepower, and the grim determination of men defending their only runway home. Caldwell pushed his throttle forward and climbed. The first Zero came at him head-on. Classic Japanese tactic designed to exploit the Wildcat's slower roll rate. The enemy pilot opened fire at 800 yards, tracers arcing through the sky like malevolent fireflies. Caldwell held his course, his hand relaxed on the stick, his finger feeling the vibration through the shoelace. The Zero grew larger in his gun sight, its engine cowling painted with a yellow stripe, its canopy reflecting the morning sun. 600 yards, 400, 300. Caldwell squeezed the trigger. The Wildcat shuddered as the wing guns fired not a continuous roar but a stuttering burst, 3 rapid pulses in perfect rhythm with the engine's harmonics. The shoelace transmitted the vibration to his finger, and his nervous system responded faster than conscious thought. Converged on the Zero's left-wing route, the enemy aircraft shuddered, rolled violently to starboard, and began trailing smoke. Caldwell released the trigger after 1.2 seconds, exactly as he had practiced. His propeller was intact. Its guns were still firing. The Zero went into a spin, its pilot either dead or incapacitated, and fell away toward the jungle below. First, kill. Time elapsed. 9 seconds. A second Zero pulled up in front of him, climbing vertically in a desperate attempt to gain altitude advantage. It was a maneuver the lightweight Zero could execute with ease, something no Wildcat should attempt to follow. Caldwell didn't try. Instead, he pulled his nose up 20 degrees, felt the vibration change through the shoelace as his airspeed bled off, and fired another precisely timed burst. The bullets walked up the Zero's belly, punched through the unarmored fuel tank, and the enemy fighter exploded in a blossom of orange flame. Pieces of aluminum skin and burning fabric tumbled past Caldwell's canopy, close enough to see the serial number stenciled on the debris. Second kill. Time elapsed. 23 seconds. What the Japanese pilots encountered in those next 18 minutes was something their training had not prepared them for. They expected a brawling furball, a chaotic dogfight where superior maneuverability would triumph. What they got instead was a methodical dismantling. Caldwell's Wildcat should have been easy praise, lower, heavier, less agile. But he wasn't fighting their fight. He wasn't trying to outturn them. He was using the shoelace vibration to fire bursts so short and so precise that his faulty synchronization gear never became a liability. Each burst was timed to the millisecond, each trigger pull synchronized with the harmonic frequency of his engine. It was less flying and more conducting, a brutal symphony played out at 300 miles per hour. A third Zero latched onto his tail, tracers snapping past his canopy. Caldwell didn't panic. He rolled, inverted, pulled through a split S dive, and used the Wildcat's superior structural strength to pull G-forces that would have torn the lightweight Zero apart. The enemy pilot tried to follow and exceeded his airframe limits. It's left. Wing folded backward at the root, and the Zero cartwheeled into the ocean, trailing pieces of itself. Third kill. Time elapsed, 1 minute, 47 seconds. The Japanese formation was beginning to come apart. The bombers had dropped their ordnance, most of it falling harmlessly into the jungle and returning for home. The remaining Zeros were scattered, their tactical cohesion shattered by losses they hadn't anticipated. Japanese radio discipline, usually flawless, was breaking down. Pilots were shouting warnings, calling for support, reporting the impossible. A single American fighter that could not be shaken, could not be outturned, and fired with a precision that seemed mechanically impossible. Caldwell climbed back into the scrum. A fourth Zero appeared in his gun sight, attempting a beam attack from his left. Caldwell pulled lead, felt the vibration through his finger, fired. 2-second burst. The Zero's canopy shattered. The aircraft snap-rolled and dove vertically into the sea, leaving a white scar on the blue water that faded in seconds. Fourth kill. Time elapsed. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. A fifth Zero, flown by what must have been a veteran pilot, executed a beautiful lag displacement roll and came around onto Caldwell's tail. It should have been a killing position. Instead, Caldwell executed a maneuver that would later be analyzed in tactical schools. Violent skidding turned that bled off airspeed, while changing his flight path unpredictably. The shoelace vibration told him exactly when his aircraft was on the edge of a stall, giving him tactile feedback that no instrument could provide. He horsed the Wildcat around inside the Zero's turn radius, something that should have been aerodynamically impossible, and snapped off a 3-burst sequence. The Zero's engine seized, its propeller windmilling uselessly, and the pilot bailed out, his parachute blossoming white against the green jungle below. 5th kill. Time elapsed 6 minutes 38 seconds. By now, the remaining Japanese pilots were actively avoiding Caldwell's aircraft. They had seen 8 of their comrades shot down in less than 7 minutes by a single Wildcat that should have been inferior to their Zeros in every measurable way. It violated their understanding of aerial combat. It contradicted their training. It was in the cold mathematics of war possible. But Tommy Caldwell had never been good at following rules. A 6th Zero made the mistake of crossing in front of him during a climbing turn. Caldwell pulled lead, felt the rhythm through his finger, and fired. The burst was surgical, 23 rounds total, spread across a 2-second window. 14 of them struck the Zero's fuselage. The enemy fighter broke apart in midair, the tail section separating cleanly from the rest of the aircraft, both pieces tumbling into the jungle canopy below. 6th kill. Time elapsed 9 minutes 14 seconds. A 7th Zero attempted a high-side attack, diving from above and behind in a textbook deflection shot. Caldwell saw him coming, not through mirrors or visual sighting, but through the change in his aircraft's vibration as the Zero's prop wash disturbed the air around him. He broke hard left, pulled the Wildcat into a punishing 7G turn that grayed his vision, and came out of it with the Zero in his gun sight. He fired. The enemy pilot never had time to react. As his aircraft shuddered, caught fire, and spun into the ocean trailing black smoke. 7th kill. Time elapsed 12 minutes 9 seconds. The 8th and final Zero was flown by a pilot who made only one mistake. He stayed in the fight when he should have run. Caldwell's ammunition was nearly exhausted. His airframe had taken hits from at least 2 different enemy aircraft. Hydraulic fluid was leaking from somewhere in the right wing, leaving a thin vapor trail. His engine temperature was climbing into the red zone. He should have broken off, returned to base, claimed an extraordinary victory. Instead, when he saw the last Zero circling alone above the bomber stream, confused and leaderless, something cold and mechanical took over. The Zero pilot never saw him coming. Caldwell approached from below and behind, climbing slowly through. The Zero's blind spot a position called the coffin corner by experienced fighter pilots because once an attacker reached it, escape was nearly impossible. He positioned his Wildcat with the precision of a surgeon, felt the shoelace vibrations steady and strong, and fired his last extended burst. The tracers converged on the Zero's unarmored cockpit. The enemy aircraft rolled, inverted, and fell. Away, smoke pouring from its engine, the pilot slumped forward against his harness. 8th kill. Time elapsed 19 minutes 47 seconds. The sky was suddenly empty. Caldwell circled once above the scene of the engagement, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Below him, columns of black smoke rose from the jungle where burning aircraft had crashed. Oil slicks marked impact points in the ocean. A single parachute drifted lazily toward the water, the pilot beneath it likely wounded or dead, the Japanese formation was gone, scattered back toward Rabaul with losses they could not afford and a story they would not want to tell. Caldwell turned toward Henderson Field and descended. His Wildcat was a wreck. The right main gear wouldn't extend fully, forcing him into a partial wheels-up landing that tore the belly tanks open and covered the runway in aviation fuel. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft before it had fully stopped rolling, pulling Caldwell from the cockpit and shouting questions he couldn't quite process. Someone counted the gun camera footage. Someone else examined the aircraft and found 73 bullet holes. The armorer unwrapped the shoelace from Caldwell's finger and stared at it, like it was a religious artifact. In the weeks that followed, stories spread through the Pacific Theater with the speed of wildfire. Command tried to keep it classified, worried that if the Japanese learned of the shoelace technique, they might develop countermeasures. But word leaked anyway, the way all great wartime stories do, carried by mechanics and radio operators and pilots rotating back to Pearl Harbor for rest. By December, every Marine aviator in the Pacific had heard about the pilot who shot down 8 Zeros in 20 minutes using a leather bootlace and pure instinct. Japanese intelligence eventually compiled a report on the action based on debriefs of the surviving pilots and recovered wreckage. The document, discovered after the war in captured archives, described the engagement as anomalous and indicative of unexpected technical advancement. The Japanese analysts could not accept that a single American pilot flying an inferior aircraft with faulty equipment had achieved what their own calculations said was impossible. They theorized secret weapons, experimental electronics, even divine intervention. They never considered the truth: that necessity had forced innovation, that a desperation had bred genius, and that sometimes the most powerful technology is the ability to adapt. Tommy Caldwell flew 43 more combat missions before he was rotated back to the United States in March 1943. He was awarded the Navy Cross, Distinguished Flying Cross, and 3 Air Medals. He refused to participate in war bond tours, declined interviews, and never spoke publicly about the shoelace technique. After the war, he returned to Nebraska, took over his father's crop dusting business, and spent the next 40 years flying low and slow over wheat fields, never once discussing what happened in the sky above Guadalcanal. The shoelace itself was preserved by the Smithsonian Institution. Though few visitors understand its significance, it sits in a climate-controlled case alongside more conventional artifacts, medals, uniforms, weapons. It is brown, worn, 16 inches long, with frayed ends where it was cut from a Marine Corps boot. Small placard describes it as improvised. Aviation equipment, Guadalcanal, 1942. Nothing more. But that shoelace represents something larger than its physical form. It embodies the peculiar genius of American warfare, not superior technology or overwhelming resources, but the willingness to improvise, to adapt, to find solutions in the margins where doctrine and training offer no answers. The Japanese military machine was built on precision, on centuries of martial tradition, on the belief that discipline and spirit could overcome material disadvantage. What they encountered instead was a different kind of spirit, pragmatic, inventive, reverent toward authority, and utterly ruthless in its application. The German military theorist Karl von Clausewitz wrote that war is the realm of uncertainty, where friction and chaos reign supreme. In that realm, he argued, the side that can adapt fastest to changing circumstances holds an insurmountable advantage. Tommy Caldwell proved Clausewitz right in the most literal way possible. Faced with faulty equipment and impossible odds, he didn't request better tools or wait for official solutions. He wrapped a shoelace around his finger and invented a new way to fight. The 8 Japanese pilots who died that morning were not cowards or incompetents. They were skilled aviators, products of rigorous training and a warrior culture that had produced some of the finest fighter pilots in the world. They flew aircraft that were, on paper, superior in almost every performance metric. They followed tactical doctrine that had been proven in countless engagements. They did everything right according to the rules, as they had been taught, and they still lost, because Tommy Caldwell wasn't fighting by their rules. The shoelace technique was never officially adopted by the Marine Corps. It couldn't be standardized, couldn't be taught in flight school, and depended too heavily on individual feel and instinct. But word of it spread anyway, carried through the informal networks that connect warriors across generations. Pilots began experimenting with their own improvisations, their own solutions to problems that official channels couldn't solve fast enough. The culture of innovation that characterized American air power in World War II, the willingness to modify aircraft in the field, to ignore maintenance schedules in favor of combat readiness, to let frontline troops make decisions that would normally require command approval, can trace its lineage directly back to moments like Caldwell's fight above Henderson Field. In the broader strategic picture, 8 aircraft destroyed in a single engagement barely registers as a footnote. The The Japanese lost thousands of aircraft over the course of the Pacific War. 8 more or less changed nothing in the grand calculus of industrial production and resource allocation. But wars are not won solely by spreadsheets and logistics tables. They are also won in the minds of those who fight them, in the slow accumulation of doubt that comes from repeated tactical defeats, in the erosion of confidence that accompanies the realization that the enemy is adapting faster than you can respond. After October 26, 1942, Japanese pilots over Guadalcanal fought differently. They became more cautious, more defensive. The aggressive tactics that had dominated the early months of the Pacific War gave way to a kind of tactical conservatism, born from the recognition that American pilots were no longer easy prey. It was a subtle shift, difficult to quantify, but it echoed through every subsequent engagement. The psychological advantage, that intangible quality that allows one side to seize initiative and dictate the terms of battle, had begun to slip away from Japan, and it started with a shoelace. There is a photograph of Tommy Caldwell taken 3 days after the engagement, published without his permission by a Navy photographer and later used in recruitment materials. He is standing beside his damaged Wildcat, still wearing his flight suit, his face gaunt from malaria and exhaustion. His right hand rests casually on the aircraft's wing, and if you look closely, very closely, you can see a thin leather cord wrapped around his index finger, partially hidden beneath the cuff of his glove. He is not smiling. He looks like what he is, a young man far from home, doing a job that requires him to kill other young men far from their homes, using whatever tools and tricks he can devise to survive just one more day. That photograph is a more accurate representation of American military power than any parade or demonstration of advanced technology. It shows the reality of war fought by citizen soldiers who bring with them not centuries of martial tradition, but rather the improvisational spirit of a young nation built on the idea that problems are meant to be solved, that rules are meant to be tested, and that sometimes the most effective weapon is simply the refusal to accept that something cannot be done. The Japanese Empire was built on the philosophy of Yamato Damashii, the spirit of Japan, a belief that cultural homogeneity, ancient tradition, and collective will could triumph over material disadvantage. It was a beautiful philosophy, romantic and compelling, and it led them to believe that American pilots, soft from democracy and individualism, could be defeated through superior spirit and discipline. What they discovered instead was that democracy produces its own kind of warrior, not one bound by tradition or rigid hierarchy, but one empowered to think, to question, to improvise, to find solutions that fall outside the boundaries of official doctrine. Tommy Caldwell was not a better pilot than his Japanese opponents in terms of raw skill or training. What he possessed, instead, was the freedom to experiment, the authority to trust his own judgment, and the cultural background that taught him problems are solved through innovation rather than adherence to established methods. That is the lesson written in a 16-inch piece of worn leather, now carefully preserved behind museum glass. Not that American technology was superior, it often wasn't. Not that American training was better, it frequently wasn't. But that the American system, messy and improvisational, and sometimes frustratingly inefficient, produced individuals who could adapt to circumstances faster than systems built on rigid hierarchy and centuries of tradition. The sky above Henderson Field is quiet now. The jungle has reclaimed most of the wreckage. Coral has grown over the sunken aircraft. The men who fought there are mostly gone, their memories fading with them. But the story remains, carried forward by those who understand that history is not just the chronicle of great battles and famous generals, but also the record of small innovations and individual acts of genius that shift the balance when everything else seems equal. Tommy Caldwell's 8 victories in 19 minutes did not win the Pacific War, but they illuminated a truth that would echo through every subsequent campaign. From the Marianas to Iwo Jima to the skies over Japan itself, that the side which can adapt fastest, which can empower its warriors to think and improvise and find solutions in the moment, holds an advantage no amount of pre-war planning can overcome, and sometimes that advantage comes down to something as simple as humble and as impossibly effective as a leather shoelace wrapped around a trigger finger, conducting the vibration of an engine into a rhythm of destruction that doctrine never taught and tradition could not answer. That is what freedom sounds like when it discounts like when it. That is what 8 zeros learned in 20 minutes above Guadalcanal. And that is what a single worn bootlace teaches us still. Decades after the guns fell silent and the smoke cleared from tropical skies, that the most dangerous opponent is not the one with better weapons or superior numbers, but the one who refuses to accept that the problem cannot be solved, who looks at impossible odds and asks not why, but rather how, and who finds the answer in places no manual ever thought to look. Tommy Caldwell. Found it in his boot, and for 19 minutes and 47 seconds on an October morning in 1942, that was enough.